All right, Coach2Scale crew, buckle up because this week we've got Andy White, VP of Sales at Trivy, aka the Duolingo for corporate learning. He's dropping wisdom from Dallas. Andy's a former ball player who knows that failure isn't a bug, it's the game. Try succeeding just 20 times out of 100 and see how humbling that is. And it's that mindset that shaped how he approaches sales, leadership, and coaching. We're going to hit topics like why alignment matters, effective strategy for one-on-ones, the killer coaching question, what story are you telling yourself? And bonus one, how to get promoted from the frontline manager position to VP and CRO. So grab your coffee, your whiskey, your water, or whatever fuels your brain. This one's full of actionable ideas. And hey, don't just listen, jump into the conversation. Hit me up on LinkedIn with your biggest takeaway and make sure to subscribe to the Coach2Scale YouTube channel. Let's elevate our coaching and leadership skills together. Let's go.
Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Benelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by Coachum, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started.
Today's guest believes you can learn a lot from failing, and he says he learned a lot about it playing minor league and professional baseball. He spent the last decade plus in the sales and sales management arena, working really hard, grinding it out, and coaching people up. Currently, he's VP of Sales at Trivy. Andy White, welcome to Coach2Scale.
Matt, thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to dive in today.
Listen, anybody who's played baseball at the level that you played at and worked and like that type of pressure, and also as a Red Sox fan, even though you live in Dallas, I'm happy to talk to you.
Hey, it's not easy, right? But I can always find the true Red Sox fan by the tone of their voice, right? If you're just watching a Yankees Red Sox game, love going into a bar and just finding those true Red Sox fans. So they're far and few between, but we find them all the way down here in Dallas as well.
Well, yeah, they're the ones that yelling Yankees suck even after a Patriots game.
Yep.
So it's they're out there. So Andy, let's jump right into it.
Yep.
We start off always with a myth buster question. And what's a myth in this business of coaching and leading salespeople that you believe is misguided or maybe even a complete crock?
Yeah. One of the ones that's come up, I think, recently is the one-on-one meeting is dead, right? So now I'll say it might be dead for the CEO, right? He's got too many things on his plate, but around sales leadership, I'm really finding that one-on-one meeting where you just come on and say, hey, you got to get your numbers up, or, how can I help? That meeting is dead, but it could not be more important to have effective one-on-one meetings that are really driving performance and building trust. Now, in my experience in the last 2 years, right, I've just always heard this theme of trust coming up, especially with AEs. And I really think that's more of a microcosm of, right, we saw some of the best companies in the world starting to lay off employees. And, people were laid off not because of their performance, but because, hey, senior leadership overhired. And you just got this distrust in this market now, especially with your hybrid and remote workers. So I think these one-on-one meetings are absolutely critical for sales leadership to really build trust, build some accountability, and really what I'm focused on a lot of my one-on meetings is driving alignment. How do we align where we are trying to go as a company and with our sales reps and make sure that we have the tools and the sets and the frameworks to really start to drive actual performance?
It's funny when you say the one-on-one is dead because, I might not hear that like from people like through my ears, but I see it. I observe it in practice. I mean, a lot of reps say, oh, I never have a one-on-one with my manager, or they'll say I have a one-on-one scheduled, but never happens. Something always pops up that seemingly more important. And so I wonder who's, I think the same person that is writing the book, The One-on-One is Dead, is the same one that wrote the book Cold Calling is Dead.
Yep.
I think you might want to believe it, but it's not really true. So
for sure. So I think there's an evolution to that, Matt, right? And I think maybe just to make one point on that is and I've seen that a lot, experienced that a lot is, hey, there's a fire drill. Hey, let's cancel this one-on-one, right? But a stat that really came out to me was a Gartner study. It said 89% of sellers, feel disconnected. And then half of those are passively looking for a job. And really what that came down to was, hey, there's just a distrust. I'm just kind of in this job day to day, right? But if something better comes along, I'm going to jump at that opportunity. And really what that shows me is, hey, there's a disconnect here. Because to your point, I've got the one-on-one meeting, but I'm not really providing any value as a leader. And as the AE or an individual contributor for that matter, I'm not really getting anything where we're solving any real problems. So yes, cancel it. I don't care, right? We're not covering anything important. I think that's really the problem that we gotta fix. It's more about the efficiency of the meeting versus, hey, are we actually having that?
Yeah. So true. Andy, we talked about in an earlier call, we talked about the importance of alignment and that really you're a builder.
Mhm.
How important is alignment when building and constructing sales teams?
Yeah. Well, and I think, just looking at my past and when I say, hey, what does a builder actually mean? I found that great go-to-market leaders, they have a vision towards the future. And what we're really trying to connect is, all right, how do we get there with the current tech stack? We've got high sales or growth targets that we need to hit. How do we align and make sure that we're focused on hitting those objectives and really bringing in what I would consider that customer feedback loop? Now, man, I really got this more exposure into sales leadership when I was cross-functionally meeting with other departments, marketing, IT, customer success, and really understanding like if we all get in a room and say, hey, what's your number one priority? You're never going to find the right answer, right? Like no one's going to come up with this is going to solve everything or hey, we're all aligned on this area because we're all judged by different metrics.
Hmm.
But what I found is that when you can start to drive alignment and consistency, it's really about, hey, what are we looking at week after week, and what are we starting to strive for? One of the big things that I think we all can hire for, right, are traits. And I've seen this in interviews. We ask questions. We want that curiosity. We want people to continue to come back and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. But as sales leaders, what we really need to define is, all right, hey, we've got these great traits. What skills do we need to focus on developing? And how do I align those skills with revenue impacts that'll actually drive performance? So I spend a lot of time just on alignment, and sometimes it's company goals, but also it's really specific to, hey, what skills are we working on? How do we align your skill set with some of the objectives that we've got? And really, how can we more partner together to where you feel aligned with me on, hey, we've got a plan, we've got a strategy, and now we've got something that we can go back on that's actually meaningful.
So can somebody be very talented but not be in alignment with the team? And Andy, here's what's getting me thinking about it. I know you're a sports fan, so I'm going to throw this one at you. It might not be fair. If it's out of your wheelhouse, we'll just go to something else. But I'm listening on the radio this morning, and it seems like every morning lately they're talking about the trade, Jimmy Butler, NBA basketball
Mhm.
player, Miami Heat. So I don't think anyone's going to question this guy's talent. But for whatever reason, he's a pain in the ass. And
Yeah.
he just leaves one organization, goes to the other, makes more money by being a pain in the ass. And now he demands a trade. And I'm just thinking, if I'm a GM, do I want this guy on my team, even though he's super talented? Is there a correlation here to hiring really talented salespeople that just might be a pain in the ass?
Yeah, look, you're always going to have a pain in the ass with some of your top performers, right? And honestly, I welcome that. And Matt, funny enough, like Dallas, right? I mean, we took on Kyrie Irving, right, who is historically not very well liked in Boston. But I would argue that, hey, when he came here, they did drive some alignment, right? Now, I think use the Jimmy Butler or, right, we talk about Kyrie
He
Irving.
didn't beat the Celtics.
Incredibly,
Keep going, yeah.
yeah, I was going to say just incredibly talented individual people, right? You put them on a court, I think Kyrie Irving especially, right? Just some of the moves that he can make are unparalleled. And I think you can see that a lot in sales to say, man, this person delivers an incredible speech that is just out of this world, right? It's like, hey, how do I get you in front of more prospects? Because you are going to sell and really align with that. But I think what that really comes down to is there's something in these players with these organizations where there's some trust erosion, right? Whether it's with Pat Riley or some other area, there's trust that's eroded. And what's coming to a head is no one's taking the time to take the step back and say, how do we start to realign these priorities, right? I think it's always really important. And I use this example, and I think it's really prevalent for athletes, is there's this difference between, that what you perceive, right? So looking at your point of view or your perception. But sales leaders, and especially like leaders of teams, they can have what we would consider more of a perspective to give you, hey, here's the big picture. We're trying to win a championship, right? Now, Jimmy, I know you want the ball. I know you want 30 points a game. I know you're an incredible athlete, but here's how we're going to align this vision and involve you as a player. You might not be the star player every night, but the reason is because I've got Tyler Hero on the right side that is incredibly hot, right? He can make everything. And I think sometimes it's checking your ego at the door. You look at the Golden State Warriors, Matt. How do you operate with Steph Curry, right? You've got all these great players, but Steph can take a step back and say, hey guys, I'm triple teamed. Let's find the open guy or find the hot guy.
But Andy, to your point, like you have to have the right people who are willing to do that, because you can't have that conversation with everybody. So if we flip it to hiring salespeople, let's say it's aligned about you have to have alignment around objectives. So if you're trying to build a team as a sales leader that's built for the long term, and to do things the right way, and not have one superstar, not have one person at 300% and everybody else at 30%, but have everybody, as many people as possible, getting over 100%, which means kind of everybody needs the ball, so to speak. But someone might come into the interview process and say, you know what, I want to make, I don't know, throw a number of $500,000, $750,000, $1 million. And for whatever reason, that might just not be possible at a company, not your company, but at a company, just the way the comp plan's designed. If you're going to make $1 million, like it's unheard of at a company. So alignment wouldn't be there, right? Like, do you want to win a championship, or do you want to make the most money? Like, is that important?
Yeah, look, I think you're bringing up a great point, right? Any AE, right? They're really looking, they're asking those questions. Hey, I want to make money. Sometimes there's different goals that you might have, from a company versus winning a championship, right? It's easy to say every NBA team, like we're trying to win, versus sales teams, hey, we're trying to hit numbers. Now, if you look across the board, in 2024, I think average quota attainments were about 40%. So really highlights your point on, look, we've got a lot of people that are misaligned, and sometimes that's leadership's fault. Sometimes that's saying, hey, we need to hit these numbers because we raised a big round, Matt. We're not really expecting every rep to hit this. So sometimes there is going to be that disconnect. And I think that's where it's really important for sales leaders to take a moment and sit down and say, hey, let's really walk through the numbers. Sometimes that's one-on-one, kind of like this conversation that we're having now, to say, Matt, I need to hear as an AE, like, where are you struggling? Like, where are we having some issues? And we can really look at the numbers. But I'm also having that meeting with our sales leadership team, right? Whether that's a CRO down or the CEO, to say, look, these numbers are objectively high. How are we going to bridge this gap in delta? And I think if you start to open up those conversations, that creates the meaningful conversations that we need to have, where you don't get the, hey, I'm just complaining all the time because I don't have the right leads, or I can make this much money if I, go to this company. So I need you to raise my income. Those types of things. I think there's certainly some gives and gets, but it's got to be a two-way street. And a lot of times I just hear it's an AE putting a lot of pressure. And then when they don't get what they want, right, they bounce to the next company because they weren't aligned.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy stuff. General managers are like sales managers. I mean, you're dealing with the same stuff that Pat Riley's dealing with, on a slightly different scale. So let's go back to the one-on-one. So I think we can agree that the one-on-one is not dead, and it does matter. The question is, how do you make it productive? Andy, in your one-on-ones that you have and that you work with your team on, is there a framework that you use to make sure that they're effective and productive?
Yeah, early on, Matt, I would say my first couple one-on-ones, absolutely not. And they were just some of the most pointless meetings that I could have. So very quickly, I figured I've got to figure out something. And one of the frameworks that I've really implemented over the past couple of years, where I've seen great impact, is using the framework of, can we separate it between, personal, professional, and then future facing. So like if I've got a 30-minute meeting or if I've got a 60-minute meeting, typically trying to separate those 10 to 20 minutes each, depending on how much time I have, but really trying to focus on those three elements for a couple of reasons, mainly trust, right? And one of the ways that I do that is if we can have a conversation so I can understand you personally, I am going to have a lot better and meaningful conversation with you moving forward. And I'm going to start to attack that, number of 89% of sellers feeling disconnected, because now I can really have meaningful understanding on who are you, right? What's your background? How do you like to communicate? Funny enough, Matt, one of the things that I've actually done is I try to create an operating guide of how to work with me as a leader, right? And meaning, hey, I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan. I'm giving, I've got kids. Here are just some things about me that I want you to know. Here's the way that I communicate. And I'm even trying to share weaknesses, right? So it shows that level of, hey, you can hold me accountable. I want to open this up so we can understand each other and I can understand and align there. What that now sets me up to do, Matt, over time is it's a lot easier to have difficult conversations. It's a lot easier for us to talk through and say, hey, I've got your best interest at heart. If your performance isn't here, right, now we can have there's not this read on, like, what are his intentions? Is he just trying to fire me? Like, you start trying to read the tone and not really understand. But now we can start to build these relationships, because I think we've lost a lot of that in hybrid or even remote models where you get onto a call, you just got to go straight to meetings, right? It's like we might have 8 meetings in a day, a couple internal, a couple customer facing. We're really struggling to come up with, all right, how do we have these like deep interactions? So that now gives me into the professional where, again, what I don't want the one-on-one meeting is to turn into this deal review time where I get to grill you on like why these deals haven't closed and what are you committing to, create these high pressure environments. Now we can start to talk a little bit more tactically to say, all right, how do we actually go about closing this deal? Like, what roadblocks do we see? It now turns into that partnership. Where I really try to end up on that, Matt, is now trying to understand, especially if it's an SDR, AE, like, what does the future look like? And these can be your boring questions of like, where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? I always like pattern, like interrupt questions. I want to ask something that you're not really hearing, just so I can get a little bit deeper. But as we start to come, but I would say a good question or one that I asked is like, we were talking about like, what was a big struggle, professionally. And I just kept hearing these complaints over and over. And so I just kind of stopped and took a step back. And Matt said, what story are you telling yourself? And the rep kind of looked at me just with just a dazed look. I'm being like, what did you just ask me? And I just try to throw that question out there because you're never going to get that, question normally. But what I was trying to do is like, look, all I hear are complaints. You keep telling your story on like, marketing's not giving me enough leads. Like, you have this just very narrow view. But what I'm hearing is, hey, you want to be a director of sales, right, in the next 2 years. Do you think this pattern or this behavior is going to help get you there, right? So just trying to help them unpack these pattern, interrupt, like great, Chris Voss's book, like Never Split the Difference, just great examples on how you can do that. I'm trying to bring that same, idea here to these meetings on like, look, if you ask the same questions, you're going to get the same generic bland answers. Figure out some ways to ask some questions creatively to understand and kind of package these things together. Because if you do that, Matt, right? I mean, even us talking right now, personal, professional, future, I've got a really good understanding where you want to go in the future. We're building trust and building rapport, even though that's not the focus of the meeting. And now when we're looking at, how do we judge performance over the next couple of years, now we've got a really easy path to understand how do we get there, right? So I think that's a lot better way to run an effective one-on-one that's actually helping with performance and not just checking the box to say, all right, how can I help in your day-to-day endeavors?
That's great. So the framework, no matter how long the meeting is, it's a third roughly of like personal, like how you doing, third like business, and a third future. And what I hear you saying is that you're building trust by being vulnerable, like showing people where you've had challenges, where you failed, right? I love that story. I love that question. What story are you telling yourself? That's kind of a little bit of a a jab in the face, like shine the light, show the mirror, like get people thinking about like, wait, what am I telling myself? Like, what's that
Yeah.
negative self-talk that's going? And I love the Chris Voss reference. My favorite question from his book, if I remember it right, is how do you expect me to do that? So whenever
Yeah.
a prospect would ask, or a customer would ask for a discount or some crazy thing that prospects and
Yep.
customers ask for, be like, yeah, I'd love to do that. How do you expect me to do that?
I
That
love
worked.
it. Yeah.
That worked. Yeah.
Yep.
It's so true. Like put it back on them. They're like, I don't know. What am I going to do with that? So you talked about, like, you made a reference to difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And that question in and of itself, what story are you telling yourself? That's a gateway to maybe a difficult conversation,
Yep.
for sure. But how do you prepare for a tough conversation with a rep who is struggling or may have some head trash that's really getting in the way of he or she doing their job?
Yeah, no, it's one of the most daunting elements, and especially for first-time managers. Going back on my experience, Matt, when I stepped into a management role, right, as a 24, 25-year-old, right, I had a big challenge, managing people that were a lot older than me, that had a ton more experience. It's like, how do I give them feedback, right, when I'm thinking that they should know better, right? So that was like this just angst that I created. But I think there's two things that I would start with, and we can riff on this a little bit. But one of the big elements that I would start to ask for is ask the rep if it's the right time to give feedback. What I found that between good managers and sometimes great is understanding when to give feedback, right? And then sometimes where I found that most effective is asking permission to do that, right? So in the event of like, hey, we get on a big call, right? It's a big presentation. We've got all leadership and it just doesn't go well, right? It's probably not the best time to give some feedback on like, hey, I know what needs to happen here, but the rep might not be in the right headspace to take it. So I think always being able to ask that question and say, hey, Matt, like, I've got some feedback to give you. Is now a good time to cover this? Right?
Right.
That can kind of open up the conversation, and you've got to give them space to say, hey, not right now, right? I might need some time. Like, let's schedule some time to where we can go through this versus, hey, I'm feeling attacked because you're kind of giving me feedback out of the blue, especially if I wasn't expecting it, right?
All right.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So this is great. So let's continue down this road. So
Yeah.
my wife got some fantastic training, leadership and coaching training through, she had a yoga business for many years. And she would come back and talk about what she learned. And it's the same stuff that I'm learning in my sales leadership classes and my coaching classes. It's the same stuff. It's presented differently, but the
Yeah.
psychology underneath it is the same. And the importance of tonality and things are similar. And so, she was taught to ask the question, as you're saying, are you open to some feedback?
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of evolved into a joke between the two of us over the years because, 15 years ago when she came back from this training, I did something stupid probably. And she said,
Yep.
Matt, are you open to some feedback? I was like, come on,
Yeah.
don't give me the yogi shit. Right. But the reality is it's really good. And it was super helpful, but it all depends on how that question is delivered, which ties back to, in my mind, emotional intelligence.
Yep.
Because you need to know when to ask that question, and you need to know how to ask that question, in my humble opinion. So what say you? How important is emotional intelligence in navigating difficult conversations or giving coaching and giving feedback?
Yeah. I actually heard, I heard someone kind of talking through this, right, where they struggled early as a sales rep. And one of the big things when we talk about tonality, right, and the numbers adjust, but I feel like 70% can really come down to tonality and how we're attacking that, right? And I think if we look at tonality, and one point that I would really make, Matt, that has really impacted is continue to define what good looks like. Maybe a soundbite from that is focus on the problem and not the person. Because I think we have that narrative that we're consistently saying on like, hey, this is what the person is versus like, this is just an action. And I'm really trying to focus on this problem that I see, as going through experience, or, hey, I've got just a different perspective than you. And I'm really focused in on giving that feedback by defining what good looks like. I think in my experience, where most reps get frustrated is if it's just general feedback, which can be like biased towards like, I don't really like you, right? So I think with tonality and that emotional intelligence, it's going to come across a lot better if you can present that right tone, but be very specific with the feedback, right? Now, Matt, I think you and I would both agree that our wives certainly appreciate it, but just say, hey, I like stop spending on Amazon, right? Versus like, let's talk about a very specific purchase that I was like, this came out of left field. So I think that's where reps can start to feel attacked if it becomes a personal character attack, where it's just, this isn't quite aligned to like, I feel like you're just coming at me, versus giving very tailored and specific feedback. And so maybe, hey, I saw this is the specific question. That's why I love AI and how this is progressing. I can listen to a phone call and be like, hey, this is the specific point where we need to go from this to this. And when you can define what good looks like and not make it this personal attack, right? I'm giving you a little bit more tactical here, but that just goes beyond, hey, come in with the right tone, versus like really frame it in that side and then highlight this is what good looks like, either from another rep, what I want you to say, what our script says, something that's very tangible that they can understand, where it doesn't feel like that personal attack.
So what I hear you saying, Andy, is that I can send my wife, I can say, Andy said, stop spending on Amazon. Is that right?
That's right. Just put a link directly to it.
I'm sending her the clip. I'm 100% sending her the clip. Listen, Andy, here's the deal with that. My wife went to go see her father in Florida for a couple of weeks. The Amazon guy knocked on the door and asked us if everything was all right because he didn't have any deliveries.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
I had to get that one in. Okay. So no, but super helpful though. All kidding aside. So you have the one-on-one, you have a framework, you have a tough conversation. At the end of the day, somebody's got to be accountable. Everybody's got to be accountable for their own actions, right? Obvious statement, Captain Obvious. No one's going to disagree with that. But how do you drive accountability on your teams?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest lessons that you can learn. I read the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, and really brings in that military style, right? But I actually try to start with me on like, hey, here are some things that you can hold me accountable on, with that AE, right? And sometimes that could be counterintuitive, Matt, because I think what we talk through, especially in sales leadership, we're like, hey, we got to hold them accountable to activities and numbers, and all of these ideas really going towards how do we as sales leaders hold people accountable. So one of the keys that I've done, right, and this is uncomfortable, but I would ask anyone in sales management, take that leap of faith, is sometimes you can do it at the end of one-on-one. If you've got some good rapport with your direct reports, ask the question to them, to be like, hey, as a sales leader or in our interaction, what's something that you think I can get better at? And that works really well with maybe 4 to 6, right? Because now you can start to understand themes over the month and say, all right, I just asked this question. I'm starting to notice some themes, right? Like my empathy isn't there, right? I'm focused on there's going to be good feedback sessions that you can get. Now, sometimes, right, if it's brand new, like that question will come out too early. But if you start to create that line of, hey, I am going to be accountable to as much as I can, and I actually want you to help me hold accountable, it's a lot easier for me to come on the phone and say, hey, Matt, like, let's have a difficult conversation. I'm holding you accountable here, but I've opened the door for that feedback. And so I think that we've got to just change that one-way street to where I'm always holding you accountable for X, Y, and Z. Flip the script a little bit and see if you can create that vulnerability and open that door to receive that accountability. So it's a lot easier to give that back.
So I love it. That goes back to vulnerability. What can I be doing better? And I think what you're saying there, and I agree, is you have to have a good rap with your team Otherwise, they're going to give you some BS answer like, you're the best, boss. You
Yeah.
walk on water. Or,
Yep.
this second level down BS, which is, you care too much or you try too hard, something like that.
Yep.
But, the people who you have good relationships with, the ones that are comfortable in their own skin and have good EQ, they're going to give you the feedback. They're going to know how to give it without, being confrontational about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and over time you're gonna see a pattern. And I can speak from experience on that. I remember asking that similar question, and I remember the answers. Trying to get too much consensus to make a decision.
Yeah.
And I'm totally that person that made that mistake a while back, trying to be a builder and trying to build consensus, bringing in other lines of business into our team meetings, and maybe giving those other lines of business too much weight when making a decision, and taking too long to do it.
Yep.
That's good feedback versus like some of the non-helpful feedback. So
Yep.
I love that. Anything else that you'd add on, like that you do in terms of holding people more accountable, or at least understanding the importance of accountability in the team?
Yeah. Well, and I think so some of the reasons that you really open that up is now you also want to drive consistency, right? So I think one of those big themes is when you're trying to hold accountability, you want to have reps and teams prepared for what you're going to ask. And a great example, someone I consider a mentor was a guy by the name of Kevin Dorsey, who has some great sales leadership.
Yep.
And one of his big things was, hey, early in my career, I would just manage the overall numbers, right? And say, hey, I got a 20% close rate and we need to improve this. But he's like, each person and each rep that you have has a different issue, a different skill set that you've really got to dive into. So I think you're always operating from these frameworks on, hey, here are the questions that we're going to pull from, right? Here are the things that I expect you to be able to produce every week, whether that's forecasting, whether that's, hey, this deal's got to commit and we're using MedPick or Spice. Like, here are the frameworks, right? But I also want to go a layer deeper and be consistent in those asks. So now I can start to enable my team to start to get ahead of, all right, what question is Andy going to ask, right? When I try to just slide this through in my forecast and I don't have all of these details. So you've got to create some consistency in those asks. And that's a big reason why you're going to find it's really hard to hold people accountable, is if you're asking for something different every week, right? Because you're not creating a consistent enough framework for them to understand what to expect, for them to go solve that problem, to say, hey, if I don't have this answer, I need to go find it. So I think that consistency piece really becomes, that next level of, hey, once you've got some feedback, you've also got to communicate with them. And part of that operating guide too, that you're sharing with them, is like, hey, here's how I operate. Here's what I care about. Here's how I think we're going to go hit these numbers. You can challenge me on this stuff, but this is the stuff that we're going to focus on every week. So I need you to come prepared with that information.
Yeah. There's a famous quote out there. I can't remember who authored it. We are what we do consistently. Yeah, and we're certainly, to take that a step forward, we're a lot better. We can perform a lot better. We can show up a lot better when we know what to expect. And it doesn't have to be, stump the chump as a sales manager trying to stump your people. Andy, you've had a lot of success, and you're a VP of sales at a growing company, solid company. And the question I want to ask you, and this is for those folks that are sitting in their chairs right now, watching or listening to this, that are frontline managers, but want to get to that next level. They want to be a VP. They want to be a CRO. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's a good question, Matt. I think when I was, stepping back in my shoes, as a frontline leader, one of the things I always put a lot of pressure on my leadership team to say, hey, we're trying to hit these objectives. We're trying to hit these goals. And fortunately, when I was at Trivy, I actually got to work and report directly to our CEO, Lawrence Schwartz, who is the founder of the company. And he set me aside and said, look, Andy, if you really want to take the next step in your career, you've got to stop bringing me these problems and asking me to solve them, right? And really what I was doing was, hey, I was like, I can identify these problems, and most frontline leaders can do a really good job. They can say, hey, here's the problem. and they just go, well, I don't know how to fix it, or, it's out of my hands. And really what took me from that manager to director to VP level was starting to look at problems and then starting to figure out what's the solution, how do we implement the solution, right, within my bounds, and then how do I now report to my leadership team on what's the impact, right? What red flags do you see here after I've implemented this solution? Because when you start to get in these roles of VP and CRO, and you're in board meetings, right? That board meeting, right, might be looking back at the next 90 days, but what they're most interested in is what are we doing over the next 6 months? What are we doing over the next 18 months? How are you looking around the corner? And so when you're in these roles, I think what you've got to do is look at it holistically, because as you climb, from manager to director to VP to CRO, one of the big things that I underestimate is you're just going to be dealing with more problems, bigger problems, right? And you don't have the luxury of, hey, I can always call my direct report or XYZ. They're putting you into these roles to go solve these problems. So I think that's really the big takeaway that I would really challenge people to really grow in that mindset and have a growth mindset to understand, how do I start to identify, fix some problems, and now report back to my leadership to say, hey, here are the problems. Here's, the solution that I implemented, and here's what I'm seeing. That type of framework is really going to allow you to get to that next level versus constantly, being an accountant, just to say, hey, here are all the problems, and you go figure out what to do.
That's awesome. And thanks for sharing that. Oh, and by the way, this applies to an AE, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Harvard Business Review did a piece a long time ago. I think it was entitled something like "Who's Got the Monkey?"
Yeah, but continue to tell it. I love it.
Yeah, and so for you've heard it, for the audience, it's, if you think about this, the manager's sitting in his her cube or office, and he's got 10, 15 reps on the team, and each one of the reps comes in and, boss, I have a problem. Boss, I have a problem. The boss says, let me solve your problem. I'm the boss. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the day, after the 10 plus one-on-ones, this, each problem represents a monkey. The boss has 10 or 15 monkeys on their desk, and the reps going home and sleeping at night. Instead, what you're talking about is, don't give me the monkey. Let's talk about a solution. Let's talk about what you can implement, and let's talk about, when you implement it, what you found out. And it's going to create self-sufficiency, and it's going to see who the leaders are and who the followers are. Right, separate the wheat from the chaff.
Absolutely. And again, same theme, right? This is your perception versus perspective. How can you kind of zoom out for a second? That's what's really going to help these leaders get to the next level, is how do you reflect on what's happening, and how do you just go beyond your interpretation of the problem to start to figure out, how would the company go about solving this problem? You listen to leaders, in their interview questions, especially the CROs, the CEOs. What they look for, Matt, is ownership, right? How can I bring more people in that can take ownership as much as possible as I'm scaling this company, so we can go and solve bigger and better problems, while I can trust the people that I bring up in those leadership roles? That's what's really going to take them to those next levels, especially in those frontline leaders. You've got the keys, but you've got to also get out of your own just perception of the problems and start to figure out, how do I bring more perspective, and how do I start to drive that impact?
Extreme ownership, says Jocko Willink. So appreciate what you said there. Let's jump to AI. AI is a huge topic these days, and it means something different to every person. Andy, how are your best people, the people that are impressing you, whether they work for you, with you, or you just know what they're doing, how are the best people leveraging AI today to be more effective, not just to be efficient, but to be effective in front of the customer?
Yep. Well, Matt, I think you hit on a hot topic there, and you could probably have your own podcast now about, the application of AI and what we're seeing. But maybe to highlight, I think, a key trend that you just, talked through in 2024. I mean, and I've seen a lot of it. There's so much AI that's focused in on being efficient. How are you going to save time, right? How are you going to be more efficient as a rep, as a manager, et cetera? But one of the things that I really, gravitated towards is, there's a lot of noise in AI, and a lot of it is top of funnel, meaning, hey, for outreach, we can use Apollo, or we can use all these different technologies that can automate messaging and emails for us. Like, this is going to be great. But I was actually listening to a SaaStr presentation by Thomas Tungs, who was with Theory Ventures. And he did extensive research on this subject and really started to kind of, grasp something that I was feeling, but I just couldn't quantify it. And one of his big takeaways was we surveyed hundreds of startups that were leveraging all sorts of AI. And there was this overwhelming, I think a 92%, positive feedback on how AI is going to, save us time, be more efficient. He said, when we looked at the actual CRM data, 12% increases in, sales cycles. So it was like, we have all these perceived proficiency gains, but we have these big problems with it's actually making our sales cycle longer. Now, we can dive into what that is, but that's what really kind of changed my framework on like, hey, how are we thinking about these problems, and how are we going to go, attack it? So, Matt, specific to AI and some tools, I think there's a couple of things, at least, that I would give, sales managers or teams, maybe some takeaways on what I'm using today, where I'm seeing that really impact. And I'm also going to do it. Nothing that I'm going to recommend costs more than $100 a month. So these are relatively cheap options that you can use. But I think combine, how are we being more efficient, and combining that with how do we actually close deals faster and bring that together. And I think the first thing that I've really, I've used for years and years, partly because as a sales manager, I started out just listening to phone calls, for teams of 12 and just dying, having to listen to a 30-minute call, create a scorecard, feedback, and then hand it to them. But any type of business intelligence, tool. Now, Fathom, Fireflies, Gong, those are great tools just to get some conversational intelligence to say, here's what our pitch is, here's what our, discovery questions are. And so we can really save a lot of time by getting that data. I think things like deal rooms, I've really seen a rise now. A couple that I've used are like Fluent and Aligned that help us create business cases on strategic selling experiences, right? So these are things to say, hey, how do we combine the company's objectives, and how do we create this point of view on what's the impact that our technology that we sell or our services that we sell, what's the impact on the business? How do we really quantify that? And I think that what that's allowed these companies to do is really enable a champion, because there's so much internal selling, I think, today. Again, I think the stat that we see a lot is that 70% of that buying journey is a lot of times already completed by the time they reach out to an AE, because there's so much information that you can go research now. Really what a lot of these strategic sellers are trying to figure out is, how do I actually apply this? How do I bring that down to the level? And I'm an early adopter, admittedly, Matt, on AI. So one of the tools that I've actually been using recently, and it actually came from that SaaStr event, being like, how do I actually improve my deal cycles and how fast they're closing? It's a newer tool out there, but it's called Zinnia. It's Copilot for AEs. And it's helping really manage that middle of funnel and leveraging AI. So what we do from our teams is we upload a lot of marketing material. It aligns to make sure all of our reps are saying the exact same message. And then it leverages AI to look through 10K reports, podcasts, any information that we can find about key decision makers or the company, and puts it together to create a custom playbook. And really where that's made an impact is, right, when we have, an AE that's got 4 meetings a day, typically I'm doing a lot of research to come up with a point of view on, hey, what, you're going to buy my technology. Like, so what? Like, why should I do it now? And really what that comes down to is alignment. So some of those tools have gone a long way to help create a more efficient buying process. And those are 3 of them, right, that have freemium models. They have, per user seat licenses that are relatively cheap. But the impact that I'm seeing on those, Matt, is in the 10x, because if I'm paying, $60 and even $100 a month for some of these tools, and we're closing, deals faster, and we're increasing some of those pipeline numbers, I think those are just key areas where we're seeing a lot of impact, and how I'm seeing reps effectively use AI, not just for efficiency, but actually to help customer and buying experiences.
Awesome. And I love that you laid it out like, hey, like, here are some things you could check out that are working for me. This isn't necessarily a endorsement. You're not a paid
Exactly.
Getting paid for it. Zinnia, can you spell it? I'm not 100%
Yeah,
familiar.
it's Zinnia, and
Okay.
it's just Copilot for AEs. But yeah, some of these things that just integrate with HubSpot. And again, Matt, fully transparent, early AI adopter. I'm always playing with stuff. So there's some great ones out there for sales management. I think it's just going to be more of that in 2025.
And so, yeah, awesome. So thanks for sharing that and going so deep with it. And so let's switch gears. Let's talk a little bit about you. You're at Trivy. You've been there for a while. You've been very successful. For the audience, can you tell them what Trivy does, and then what you love about working with the team right now?
Absolutely. Well, Trivy really, when I talk to customers, Matt, the way that they describe Trivy in a sentence, right, is it's Duolingo for corporate learning. And really where that came to play is I came on board, early on in Trivy's journey, just understanding, it was actually coming out of a sales meeting that I had with our CEO. Bunch of sales managers in there, and he said, "Look, guys, I'm listening to these phone calls, and 80% of the training that you're doing isn't sticking, right? We're doing lunch and learns, we're having presentations, and I get on these phone calls, and your reps aren't doing it." And when I started to look at Trivy, really what its thesis is going after something called this Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And it's this idea, Matt, that I've worked with, over 50 Fortune 500 companies in the past 7 years at Trivy. And I've had great training presentations from some of the best companies in the world. But one of the biggest challenges that we see, and we're talking about that theme today, is I've got this great new product or this great new process. We present it in a 2-hour SKO, or we do a deep dive customer use case. And then we say, "Matt, good luck. Go sell this thing. Let me know if you need any help." And this idea that we aren't able to come in and reinforce that training was leaving these large gaps where we'd now come in 90 days later and ask them, "All right, Matt, tell me, what are the key differences in our product?" Or maybe there's an update and a competitor comes out. We're seeing that a lot in AI. How do we continue to differentiate in the market? So that's really that's what excites me about the work that we do is we're staying on the cutting edge of how do we keep reps up to date on key information? How do we personalize the experience? And that's really where we've done a lot of work to understand, hey, can we create a heat map on where users have strengths and weaknesses, automatically reinforce that content based on where those strengths and weaknesses lie? So now the outcome is, hey, I can onboard people faster because, Matt, you brought me on and I really struggled with my discovery, but I got this personalized and tailored content. I'm still going through all the trainings and everything here, but now I'm getting that personalized content. So that's where we're really starting to drive some outcomes that are, reducing risk, increasing sales, and then ultimately just improving that operational efficiency around any type of training that goes out.
Awesome. Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. And I love the Duolingo for corporate learning. I mean, because, I've been in the corporate learning space and I know what Duolingo is. Maybe that's why I like it. It connects with me. But I think I had a Duolingo streak of like almost 200 days. So,
right. And that's what's so fun, Matt. Like Duolingo, and again, it's a great product if you're trying to learn a new language, but it's incredibly simple in the concept, right? I mean, Matt, what's the thing that you're remembering? Hey, I got a 200-day streak. We see similar things from our hyper competitive, customers saying, "Man, I've been on Trivy. Like, here's the certification that I earned, or here's the badge," because it's this fun element that keeps users coming back. Making it simple, making it personalized, bringing in some gamification.
Yeah.
We're seeing these retention rates really go through the roof. And really just what it comes down to is, all right, how do we actually apply this that align with some of the company objectives and making sure that we're impacting the bottom line?
Awesome. So at the Coach2Scale podcast, we bring on guests who care about coaching and developing people, right? That's we're trying to build a community of managers who want to be better coaches. And we bring on people like you to help give some ideas on how to do that. Usually, Andy, people who care about this type of stuff had that behavior modeled for them somewhere along the way. Who's somebody in your life whose coaching has had an impact on how you coach and lead your teams today?
Yeah, it's such a great question. There's so many baseball coaches and business mentors that come to mind. So I'll give you two, Matt, that I think really impacted. And a shout out to high school coach Jack Sharp, just a student of the game, but it made things incredibly simple. To say, hey, we're just going out and we're going to play catch. All I need you to do is catch the ball. If I throw it to you, if it's a ground ball, just pick it up, right? In baseball, right, there's generally speaking like 47 things that you need to do right. Get your elbow in the right position. Don't move your head, right? Turn this. But I think the coaches that really made an impact on me had this just unique way to create these very simple concepts, right? It was a very complicated thing to understand a baseball swing, right? Now we go through you just the basics here, right? How do you take a round ball that's coming in 95 miles an hour? You take a round bat and I need you to hit it square, right? Like it's a very easy thing just to conceptualize, right? But go and try to do it and it becomes very hard. And I think what you're really looking for are triggers, right? Certain things that you can focus on, hey, there's probably 47 things that you can do better. But what are the 1 to 3 things that I can go make an impact now? And I think that's where coaches can really make that impact. Don't overwhelm them with this like 10-point, slide deck feature on everything that you hate about them, right? It's like, yes, maybe all of those things are true, but find 1 to 3 things that we can walk away from that meeting being like, hey, that was productive. I'm going to go focus on this. Let's see if I can improve this skill. And now what we're trying to do is just compound that week over week and year over year.
And so that was Jack. He kept things simple. Awesome. You said there was another coach?
Oh yeah, I mean, so many coaches, but I think one of the ones that it's been so interesting to see, maybe after his retirement, is Nick Saban, right? Like maybe bringing up a figure that everyone knows.
Okay.
I think Nick Saban's just ability to really go deep into, he knows every single detail about the game plan, how he prepares, right? And it's so evident, and that's why I just love seeing him. You never really get to see that in his press conferences, because he's typically yelling at a reporter for the wrong question or going off on his team. But just to see him break down and just have a love for the game, that passion comes through. And what he's really saying is, look, I've got the keys to the car. We can drive this thing as fast as you want. But if you can't focus on these fundamentals and focus on these areas, right, we are never going to get to where we want to go. So I just love coaches that have the ability to keep things simple, that know some of these intricate details that can really dive deep, but have that way to communicate it in just these simple, fun, passionate ways that really go, hey, I'm actually motivated. Maybe I got yelled at because I didn't do the right thing, but Nick Saban told me that because, he knew I could handle it, right? Now, never played for Nick Saban, but I'm giving some examples on just how he's really come to life in these podcasts on how he would pick out particular players. He would, berate them, but he knew that they could handle it, and he was creating this definition of excellence. This is what good looks like, Matt. I need you to get on this standard, and everything that you do needs to follow that. And I think that growth mindset really leads to a lot of wins.
Yeah, and look, in Saban, I mean, I try to connect everything back to New England sports. So the Patriots, Saban under Belichick, the tree there. But, a couple of things. One thing that they both did is they held everybody to the same standard. I mean, it was a lot of times it was fodder out here in the newspapers, but Belichick for the most part held Brady to the same standard that he held the rest of the team, and Brady was in alignment with that until maybe the end. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he's like, all right, I'm done.
Right.
I got 6 Super Bowls. I'm going to go somewhere else. But for the most part, like Brady was a good coachee, and Belichick for that type of coach that held people to the same standards. So, Saban's selling out though. He's on every commercial known to man.
I know.
Who's the ESPN guy that wears the tank top sometimes? The young guy, he's kind of crazy.
Pat McAfee.
Pat McAfee. Oh, yeah. So I saw some great video of McAfee like doing all this crazy stuff, flexing, and Saban's just sitting there like looking at him with the suit on. McAfee's got like a tank top on. Saban's like all suited up and just looking at him like, dude, what are you doing? Like they're 2 different planets. That, right?
Say again? Exactly. And that's what it came out. It's like, hey, Nick Saban, in the sales circles, Nick Saban's the CEO and Pat McAfee's the AE, just kind of like living life. And I was like, that's just great, right? That's just a great, understanding of, hey, 2 very successful people, 2 different approaches. But that's where we want to welcome these environments where you can be you, right? Hey, if you're the Pat McAfee type, look, I want a seat. I want you to have a seat at the table. Here's the standard. We're all going to be held to the same standard. A lot of times in sales, it's performance, but I want you to bring that personality out. I want to cultivate this. And that's where we go back to that one-on-one, Matt. Like, that's why it's so important, is because I don't want to put you in situations where you're not going to be successful. I want to bring out that charismatic attitude and that, sleeveless opportunity, right? Within the boundaries of what we set up here. But both attributes can be successful. It's just, hey, how do we apply that in the method of what's the overall goal and how do we get aligned here?
Well, Andy, that's awesome. I think that's a good place to leave it, right? Like Pat McAfee, doing his crazy stuff, and Saban looking at him like he's from a different planet. We covered a lot of ground here today. We talked about the importance of keeping it simple. We talked about focusing on the problem, not the person. Questions like, what story are you telling yourself? Or the coaching question you posed, how can I as a manager get better? You articulated a solid framework for one-on-ones, the importance of alignment, and why Jimmy Butler may not always be the best person for that team, and that the one-on-one isn't dead, damn it. So I really appreciate everything you brought to the episode today and to our conversation. I appreciate that, Andy.
Matt, thanks so much for having me. This was a great conversation, and enjoy listening to the podcast. So if anyone wants to connect, they can always find me on Trivy, and find me on LinkedIn. Happy to share any of these frameworks that we kind of talked through, for the one-on-one meeting or anything else that we've talked about, but thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Hey, and when people say, hey, connect with me if you're interested, people do it. Why not? You can learn a lot from other folks. And, I can honestly say, Andy, like, this has been just a super enjoyable conversation. The prep call that we had was great. So really appreciate getting to know you. Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot for everybody out there watching and listening. We want to bring interesting guests. We want to bring good content to you. We want to help you do what you're already doing. That difficult job, we want to make it just a little bit easier. So hopefully we're doing that. Engage on social media. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you want to see more of. And until next time, coach them if you want to keep them.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's COACHEM.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachemNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.